How about this for the sci-fi plot? A planet with double gravity and incredibly aggressive and ever-changing biosphere stands against the handful of humans clinging to it because of the richest deposits of the rarest minerals. Over a year of relentless war against the waves of monsters, people changed as well, turning themselves into the race of the super soldiers. Doesn't that sound as a great material for the adaptation to create a science fiction action blockbuster? I certainly think it does, and it makes it all the more surprising that no one yet adapted the book in question for the big screen. For decades I was dreaming that somebody will eventually turn the Deathworld, the first novel of Harry Harrison, into the movie, but that never happened. Hi, I'm Nick Hine, and on this channel I'm overloading my brain trying with crappy accent and very bad grammar to talk about the books and whatever related to reading and writing. I was about 14 years old when I first read The Death Planet by Harry Harrison, and this book has totally blown me away. Never before in my life I have read anything like that. The science fiction was a big thing in the USSR, but mostly it was about the bright communist future, utopian stuff, you know the thing. Deathworld, dark, gritty, violent, with the professional gambler and grifter as a main character, was something totally from the outer space. Something from another dimension. It's still puzzling me how this book was able to get through all the ideological censorship and get published at all in the Soviet Union. And mind you, it was first published in the USSR in 1972, when the Soviet Union was still pretty much alive and kicking. I'd read it quite a few times, last time pretty recently, and it still feels pretty fresh, solid sci-fi action thriller. I'm not planning to go into the plot of this book because probably most of you had already read it, and those who don't, please do. I don't want to get any spoilers for you. The book is great, the book is classics, it's definitely worth reading. And even though the plot sounds pretty much similar to the famous Avatar movies, I assure you, it's not. To my taste, it has more like the Aliens vibes, and I mean the first couple of movies, the really great ones. And this analogy brings me back to my dreams about this book to be adapted somehow for the big screens. I first read this book somewhere in the mid-1980s, and just a few years later the Soviet Union started to collapse. And the first thing to collapse, one of the first things to collapse in the Soviet Union was the publishing censorship. It was literally cancelled. And while formerly the Soviet Union and all the communist ideology was still present, everybody started to publish all sorts of translated Western science fiction and all other genres that was practically non-existent in the previous Soviet times. And the same thing happened with the movies. It was like just the great dam was broken and everything was flooded with the content. Of course, most of it was bootleg, it was with horrible translation, in horrible quality, but it still was there, and I was just a teenager, and for me it was double the mind-blowing, and it was really connecting with the books that I was reading. And me and several of my friends immediately started to dream whom do we want to see in the possible, in theoretical adaptations of our favorite books. And of course, one of our favorite books was the Deathworld by Harry Harrison. Of course, I know that there is 2 sequels written by Harry Harrison for the Deathworld, but Honestly, I prefer the first one. Probably it's mostly nostalgic, but that's the way it is. My favorite is the first one. And by the way, speaking about the sequels, I bet that the English-speaking audience, English-speaking readers don't know that there was several official sequels for the Deathworld series written in Russian. I think they were never translated into the English, but they were real official sequels published with the official approval from the great Harry Harrison himself. They were written by the Russian sci-fi authors, whose names probably will tell you nothing. You see a couple of funny, clunky covers for those sequels right now at the screen. But that's just a small side story. So we started to create our star cast for our imaginable Deathworld movie adaptation. And of course, the main character, Jason Dinalt, we found no one better than the young Bruce Willis. If you can't really imagine him in this role, please watch the early movies and the early TV casts for the Bruce Willis. He is the perfect candidate for this role. Next one, Kirk Peer, the representative of the planet Peer, which is pretty much described in the book as a gray-haired athletic giant. And for us, the choice was absolutely obvious, the Iron Arnie. Who's better than the Schwarzenegger? There was one problem though, because in the late 80s and early 90s, the Arnie was still pretty much a young guy, and he wasn't old enough to play the Kirk Peer. So we considered for some time, you probably would be laughing, Hulk Hogan. But of course then Arnie got a little bit older and he was the perfect fit. And the third character, the woman character, the pilot of the spaceship from the planet Peer, who is obviously also was born on the planet after the aliens, especially after the Aliens 2. There was absolutely no other choices than Sigourney Weaver. She was like no-brainer for this role. Just imagine it for a second, with those three actors, with certain Aliens 2 vibes, dark, gritty, sleazy, with waves of horrible monsters attacking constantly the humans, and this desperate fight for survival on the planet where everything is against you. It's definitely not the Avatar. Avatar is a beautiful movie. I have nothing against it, but it's not exactly it's not exactly the Deathworld. And one big difference is that there is no Aborigine race, there is no indigenous people on the planet Peer. There's only the aggressive biosphere, which is reacting to the people trying to establish their foot down there. The only reason I can think of why nobody was ever interested in making this book into the movie is that was actually the debut novel by Harry Harrison, and mostly first novels by sci-fi authors are not as famous as their latest work. And I guess everybody knows that at least one of the novels by Harry Harrison had a great adaptation. I mean, the Green Soylent is one of the best dystopian movies ever made. If you've never seen that, definitely should see it. It's awesome. There were some rumors that somewhere around the 2007 or 2008, some Russian movie production company purchased the rights to adapt this book. And I think it sounds somewhat realistic, because probably the guys, the producers who were like putting this into the motion, are most probably about the same age as me. and or maybe just a little bit older, and they had the same feelings about this book, which in the back in Soviet time was absolutely mind-blowing, a window to another reality of the science fiction. And probably the biggest engine, the greatest motive for this move was the nostalgia, just as it is for me. But bearing in mind all the attempts of Russian movie industry to adapt anything into the movies, it's probably for the best that this project was never get any further motion. There is another side quest that I went on while preparing this video. I was looking for some additional information about the first edition of the Deathworld, and there was a really weird mention in the internet that this book was published as a comic strip in the English magazine The Eagle in 1960. For all I knew, the book was first published in the 1960 as a serialized novel in the Astounding Science Fiction magazine. I have never heard anything about any comics made based out of this book. I was really interested and intrigued, so I went down this really deep rabbit hole researching what was it all about. And what do you know? It was somewhat true. I reached the bottom of the rabbit hole. The Deathworld was adapted for the comic strip by the name of Angry Planet, which was published in the British magazine, but not the Eagle, but the Boy's World in 1963. Well, as a serialized comic strip. It was based on the initial Deathworld novel, though they changed a lot for the Angry Planet. Different main characters, somewhat different main characters, different names for the main characters. They added some characters, removed some characters. They added the sentient, intelligent race for the planet where everything is happening. But it still was an adaptation for the Deathworld as a comic strip, and that was quite an interesting experience for me. I've never heard about that. While searching all of that, I've also discovered that there is a whole lot of comic books based on the Stainless Steel Rat series by the same Harry Harrison, and even the really complicated and interesting tabletop game based on these novels, but that's totally different story, and it's probably topic for another video that will probably, hopefully, emerge on my channel someday. Going back to the movie adaptation, I still wish that it would be adapted sometime, but looking at the modern era of the TV show and the movie adaptation of the classic sci-fi, I don't think it will be a good one. Just look at what they did with the Foundation by the great Isaac Asimov. I don't know. I don't want to see anything like this happen with the Deathworld. Honestly, I don't think that the Foundation was the best choice for the movie adaptation, TV adaptation, whatever. Because it's not really such a great base for the movie. It's kind of not so cinematic. The Deathworld, on the other hand, is just take it and do it. But I don't know. Right now I'm like 50-50. Part of me really wants to see this movie, and another part of me is really afraid about how Hollywood will destroy this great book. And of course, another thing is the cast, because although we had that great cast back then in the late 80s and early 90s, obviously it's not gonna work these days. And if you guys are ready to bring up any suggestion about what kind of star cast could be best for this theoretical, imaginable adaptation of the Deathworld by Harry Harrison into the great sci-fi action movie, please write in the comments. It will be really interesting to discuss this. Anyway, that's basically all that I wanted to tell you today. It was really pleasure to get back and record a new video, and I really like to talk about more books, so please like, subscribe, whatever. This was Nick Hein. Bye, see you soon.